There are moments in television history that were never supposed to happen. Moments that slipped past the editors, evaded the censors, and made it onto the screen before anyone with authority could stop them. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour had more than its share of those moments. But there's one scene, one particular night, that people who were watching still talk about decades later. It wasn't supposed to air. Nobody planned it. And when it did, it changed the way America thought about live television forever. To understand why that moment mattered so much, you have to understand what kind of show the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour actually was. On the surface, it looked like any other variety show of the late 1960s. Two brothers stood on a stage, told jokes, argued with each other, played music, and welcomed guests. CBS had designed it to look safe enough to attract advertisers, while being just edgy enough to pull younger viewers away from NBC. That was the plan, anyway. What actually happened was something else entirely. Tom and Dick Smothers were not the kind of performers who stayed inside the line CBS had drawn for them. Tom, the older brother, had a particular obsession with pushing against authority. He believed that comedy had a responsibility to say something true, even when the truth was uncomfortable. Dick, more measured and controlled in his onstage persona, understood that the friction between the two of them was part of what made their act work. Their brotherly tension, the jokes about their mother always liking the other one best, the mock arguments and the real ones, all of it created an atmosphere that felt genuinely unpredictable. Audiences could sense they were watching something that might go wrong at any moment. And on the night of September 17th, 1967, it absolutely did. The Who had been invited to perform on the show that evening. By that point, the band had already established a reputation in Britain as one of the most volatile and physically dangerous acts in rock and roll. Pete Townshend smashed guitars. Roger Daltrey swung his microphone like a weapon. John Entwistle stood perfectly still while chaos erupted around him, which somehow made everything more unsettling. And Keith Moon, the drummer, operated on a wavelength entirely his own. Moon did not simply play drums. He attacked them, argued with them, and on certain occasions, destroyed them in ways that nobody had anticipated or approved. What the producers of the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour had agreed to was a performance of my generation. What Keith Moon had quietly arranged was something considerably more explosive, without telling his bandmates, without informing the production crew, and certainly without clearing it through the layers of CBS censors, who reviewed every element of the show. Moon had packed the inside of his bass drum with the quantity of flash powder that far exceeded anything resembling a reasonable amount. The goal was a finale, an unforgettable punctuation mark at the end of the song. What he achieved was a small detonation that sent debris across the stage, blew Pete Townshend's hair into a shape that looked like it had been styled by a hurricane, and knocked Moon himself sideways off his drum stool. The cameras kept rolling. This is the part that matters. In the chaos that followed, with smoke rising and the audience somewhere between screaming and stunned silence, the broadcast captured something that had not been planned, staged, or approved. Amid the confusion, Townshend grabbed an acoustic guitar that was resting against the side of the stage. It did not belong to him. It belonged to Tom Smothers. And Townshend, still running on whatever combination of adrenaline and instinct drives a man who has just been partially deafened by his own drummer, smashed it on the stage floor. Tom Smothers stood there and watched it happen. His expression, captured briefly by one of the cameras before the director cut away, was not anger exactly. It was something closer to a man witnessing an event that he could not quite fit into any category of experience he had previously accumulated. He stared. The guitar was in pieces. The smoke was still clearing. And the audience, after a brief and bewildered silence, erupted. Now here is what makes this moment genuinely remarkable from a broadcasting standpoint. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour operated under one of the most aggressive censorship regimes in American television history. CBS had assigned censors specifically to the show. Scripts were reviewed word by word. Songs were analyzed line by line. Guest performers were vetted in advance. The network had a policy requiring that all materials be submitted for review 10 days before airtime. Every second of content was supposed to have passed through multiple layers of scrutiny before it ever reached a viewer's living room. And yet this happened. A rock drummer secretly packed explosives into his instrument. A guitar that didn't belong to the performer was destroyed on camera. The blast caused physical injury, specifically the hearing damage Pete Townsend would carry with him for the rest of his life, damaging nearly 90% of the hearing in one ear. None of it was reviewed. None of it was approved. The censorship apparatus that Tom Smothers spent 2 years fighting against, the system that cut Pete Seeger's anti-war songs and deleted Joan Baez's dedication to her imprisoned husband, failed completely and spectacularly in the one instance where its failure happened to be genuinely dangerous. There's an irony so thick you can almost hold it. CBS spent enormous energy trying to prevent Tom Smothers from saying things that might upset the government or alienate sponsors. They pulled Harry Belafonte's entire performance rather than let Americans see footage of police beating protesters at the Democratic National Convention. They censored a sketch in which Tom satirized the censorship itself, apparently without recognizing the recursive absurdity of that decision. They stayed up with President Johnson, who reportedly called the network personally to complain about the show, and with Nixon, who applied pressure of his own. All of that vigilance, all of that anxiety about words and politics and messages, and nobody thought to ask Keith Moon what was in his drum. The blooper, if you can call a small explosion a blooper, became something of a legend in rock and roll circles almost immediately. The people who saw it live understood they had witnessed something that television was not built to contain. In the years that followed, as the story of the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour became part of the broader history of American media and free speech, that night kept coming up, not primarily for the explosion itself, though the explosion was certainly memorable, but for what it revealed about the gap between what television claimed to control and what it actually could control. The show that CBS thought it was running and the show that actually existed were two different things. CBS believed it was broadcasting a carefully managed entertainment product that happened to feature two slightly provocative brothers. What it was actually broadcasting was a live demonstration that authority, when pushed hard enough and in the right direction, will always have blind spots. Moon found one of those blind spots by accident, or perhaps by instinct. Tom Smothers spent his entire tenure on the network trying to find them deliberately. What's striking about the footage from that night, when you watch it with the knowledge of everything that came before and after, is how perfectly it captures the central tension of the show. Here is a performance that was supposed to be contained, framed, approved, and broadcast in a controlled manner. Here is a camera that kept rolling when it probably should have cut away. Here is a moment that the network's entire review apparatus missed completely. And here is Tom Smothers, the man who had been fighting CBS censors for 2 years over every single word, standing there watching a British rock drummer destroy his guitar with an expression of pure, unscripted bewilderment. The hearing damage Townsend suffered that night deserves more than a footnote. He has spoken about it extensively over the decades, describing a ringing that never fully stopped, a sensitivity to sound that made performing more painful as the years went on, and an ongoing struggle that shaped his relationship to music itself. The show gave him that injury. The network that reviewed every lyric and cut every anti-war message approved the performance in advance, and somehow missed the part where the drummer had smuggled enough explosives to cause a genuine medical incident. It is a damning detail, not because the network should have been more vigilant about rock bands, but because it exposes exactly how arbitrary the censorship was. They were not protecting anyone. They were protecting themselves. By the time CBS finally canceled the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour in April 1969, the show had become something larger than a television program. It was a proxy battle for the broader cultural war that was tearing America apart over Vietnam, civil rights, and the question of who got to speak and about what. The cancellation, which CBS justified by claiming the brothers had failed to submit a tape on time, was widely understood to be exactly what Tom Smothers said it was, an attempt to silence a voice that had become inconvenient. The brothers sued. For years later, in 1973, they won. The court awarded them what would amount to more than $5 million in today's money and established a legal precedent that networks could not use censorship as a disguised mechanism for cancellation. But none of that changes what happened on September 17, 1967. On that night, in the middle of a show that was being watched by millions of Americans, something happened that no censor, no executive, No late-night phone call from a president could have prevented or prepared for. The explosion went off. The guitar was smashed. The camera stayed on. And for a few seconds, before the director found his composure and the broadcast moved on, America saw something completely real. The young writers who were in the building that night, and there were remarkable ones. Steve Martin was writing for the show. Rob Reiner was a presence there. Lorne Michaels was paying close attention to how the brothers were doing what they were doing. All of them were absorbing a lesson that would take years to fully understand. The lesson was not that chaos makes good television, though sometimes it does. The lesson was that authenticity, genuine, unmanaged, unscripted authenticity, is something audiences can feel through a screen. The laugh track could not have improved that moment. No editor could have made it better by cleaning it up. What made it extraordinary was precisely that it was not supposed to happen. That quality, the sense that something real is occurring in real time with real consequences, would become the defining aspiration of a certain strand of American comedy that runs directly from the Smothers Brothers through Saturday Night Live and onward. Lorne Michaels, who built SNL, has spoken about the influence of the Smothers Brothers in shaping his understanding of what television comedy could do. The live element, the danger of the live element, the way a live broadcast creates accountability that a taped and edited show cannot replicate. All of that can be traced back to what was happening on CBS on Sunday nights in 1967 and 1968. The night of The Who's performance was not the only time the show produced moments that bypassed the network's censorship apparatus, but it was the most dramatic, the most physically real, and in many ways the most honest representation of what the show actually was. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour was not, despite CBS's best efforts, a controlled product. It was a barely contained argument between performers who believed they had something important to say, and a network that was